I can introduce you to a farmer, Lord Monckton, that cleared a bit of silt out of a creek, and he got a $35,000 non-complying fine, or he had to plant 6,000 square metres of this prickly acacia kerosene bush and other native species on his creek beds. And in this letter it actually said to stop kangaroo intrusion. So they didn't want our little native kangaroo to get a drink either.
Which was here first, the Natural Resources Management Board or the kangaroo?
I think that's quite obvious.
It was the kangaroo. The kangaroo is Australia's most famous species, arguably. It is the symbol of Australia. And so, as I understand it, this kangaroo has now been very successful in surviving the not particularly large impact of man on this vast country. You have, what, 25 million people in a territory the size of the whole of Europe. The kangaroo is doing very well, as I understand, and is now treated by the Natural Resources Land Management Board as vermin.
Well, the whole thing there, getting back to the kangaroo bed, the kangaroo is surviving better than ever.
Yeah.
Because we have got dams,
yes.
We have got bores and so forth, which is making it a lot better, a lot easier for it to breed.
So they can find somewhere to drink which they couldn't find before.
Exactly.
In other words, your dams are not only watering your cattle, they are watering the natural livestock of this landscape that might otherwise have suffered very considerably and perhaps died in the drought.
Exactly right. Now I can tell you.
Just one very quickly before you come on to that. So just to get this really clear, the Natural Resources Management Board wants to manage these natural resources out of existence in this area by depriving not only your cattle but also the kangaroos of water. And that if they plant this spiny acacia, this Acacia paradoxa, the kerosene book, along the water margins, that pricks the coats of the kangaroos so they can't get to the water. That's what this is all about.
That's exactly right. And I can actually show you a letter that was sent to this gentleman, and where it states about the kangaroo intrusion on the riverbanks. But getting back to the riverbanks and our dams, this Natural Resource Management Board want us to fence off our creeks and our dams, all at our cost, mind you. And what is that going to do?
To fence them off from the kangaroos, or for?
Well, when you fence something off, our stock can't get a drink, the kangaroos can't get a drink.
So how do they expect your stock to get a drink if they can't get to the water?
Okay, that's a good point. Simply by this. We're going to have pumps on our dams and meters. They want to impose meters on our dams. So when you put a meter on anything, what happens? They want to charge.
Now, at the moment, as I understand it, if you use water for your household and your stock, and this is water that falls out of the sky onto your land or comes down your bit of river into your creek or your dam, at the moment they graciously allow you, do they, to use that water without charge?
Yes, at the present time.
Now, can you tell me what happened recently to one farmer that you and I have been discussing before this interview, who had been told that he had to start metering his water? Tell me about that case.
Well, that's actually a bore.
Yes.
And the gentleman, I feel that sorry for him. He's 73 years of age, and bear in mind, stock and domestic water are exempt at the moment of charge.
Right. And so there is no charge. In other words, you would not put a meter in and then start charging him for water that he was using for his household and for his cattle.
Right. Now the Department of Water...
Or would they?
Well, you know what the intentions are, and we all know that, and that's one thing we're not going to put up with, because that will absolutely destroy us alongside these low flow bypass.
So can you tell me what happened to this individual?
Right, this individual,
73-year-old man.
This individual was told that he had to put a meter on the bore, and the Department of Water came out and said the meter's got to go there, all at the food producer's expense, mind you.
Yes.
And he said, no, hang on, I've got stock and domestic water going through here, and the meter will go there. No questions asked, that's it. So his stock and domestic water are going through there. So when they eventually start charging for that water, the stock and domestic water will be charged.
I see. So what it looks as though they are preparing to do
Exactly.
is to charge you not only for water you use for other purposes, but specifically for water that you're using for your own use on your own land and for your cattle's use on your own land.
Yep.
And indeed for the passing kangaroo's use as well. You're now going to be paying for them to drink.
Exactly.
So presumably, of course, they have not yet admitted to you that they're going to charge for this water.
Well, the whole point of the thing is, the ex-Premier, Mike Rann, he said, no, he tweeted, no, farmers know that we won't be charging them for the water that falls on their properties. I'm sorry.
Now, in that case, why are meters being installed at all?
Well, because they say that so we can check on your allocation, how much water is actually being used. No, look, I can tell you now, you don't need meters. If I've got a 5 meg dam and it's half full, I'm not a mathematician, but I would say that there's 2.5 meg left. Why do I need a meter?
Well, it seems to me that's fairly intelligent. And here's a question, and it's a simple mathematical question, which is, have you ever seen any analysis by the Natural Resources Management Board that looks at two crucial numbers, which I would look at if I were running that board? The first number is the flow of the river system from this part of the land out into the sea. You could do this for the whole Murray-Darling Basin if you wanted, which is pretty much the whole of southern and eastern Australia. And you would work out how much water is flowing out to sea from Bundaberg roughly in the north down to here in the south. And you'd work out the volume of water that is flowing per year on average. And you'd look at the peak flow in a good year and the minimum flow in a bad year. And then you would look at the total number of agricultural and other dams that are capturing some of that water before it finds its way to top up the ocean. And have they ever done that comparison to find out whether having these really rather small dams on very large acreages of land actually makes the slightest measurable difference to the amount of water in a good year or in a bad year that flows out and tops up the ocean? Have they ever done that, Simon?
No, look, I've asked the question at many NRM meetings, natural resource management meetings. I've actually said to them, how much water is being held in our dams compared to the average rainfall and runoff?
Yes.
Haven't got an answer. There has never been an environment and an economic impact study done. There has never been done. And another thing with this water allocation plan for the Western Mount Lofty Ranges and Eastern Mount Lofty Ranges, this was done in 2004 to 2010 in drought times. This should be put on hold and done from 2010 to 2016, where we could have a run of average rainfall with the odd wet one.
Yeah.
And get a proper average, but they don't want to do that. All their figures are based in drought times.
Well, I think it's, to some extent, I'm going to go with them on that, because of course they've got to make sure that everybody down the pipeline gets enough water even in a drought. So of course they will want to bear that situation in mind. But the point is that dams hold water so that they can ease you over the drought years. And therefore, if they haven't done the calculation that I've just described, where you compare the total outflow in a drought year with the amount of water that's held back in the dams that would not otherwise be held back, to find out whether it really makes very much difference. My guess, and it is only a guess, because until they do the measurements we won't know, that it really doesn't make very much difference. Just to give the viewers some sort of perspective on this, because this is nearly always perspective, is nearly always lacking from the environmental lobbyists' campaigns, and of course therefore from the Natural Resources Management Board's calculations. Your field below us here, you can't even see it, but your house is tucked away down in a hollow there. And you have this enormous rainwater tank, which is taking water just from the roof of your house, which is fair to say is only a tiny fraction of an acre in extent. It's not a big house.
Yeah.
And yet that is supplying an enormous amount of water, which you can then hold in that tank and survive for a few years if everything goes wrong. Now that gives you some indication of just how much water is falling on this land and making its way through to the creeks every year. If you can get a 21,000 gallon tank filled just off one small house's roof, clearly you're not exactly short of water falling on the land.
No.
And therefore the dams that you're going to put in, it seems to me, are not going to make all that much difference. But I'd like to ask you another question which is related to that. When in the Industrial Revolution, the big industrial towns of the north of England began to expand rapidly, population grew very fast, people came into the towns to work, and of course, therefore, they needed a good water supply. And of course, the little town water supplies that had existed before were wholly inadequate. Now, did the Victorians establish a natural resources management board to go around telling people they ought not to use water? No, of course they didn't. They went and built enormous reservoirs, huge reservoirs, which were whole valleys were blocked off and filled with water so as to supply the towns. And thanks to their foresight, these towns still have enough water today because they foresaw the growth, the enormous growth that the Industrial Revolution led to, and they provided for that right from the start. Can you tell me, to your knowledge, how many major reservoir dams for water supply have ever been built during the reign of and at the instigation of the Natural Resources Management Board?
None.
Not a single one.
None.
So it is all about bullying and pestering you, and not about providing a decent and regular water supply.
Are you talking about a water supply for the city or putting dams on our properties?
I'm talking about a major water supply that would supply cities, that would supply whatever is necessary. They've never built one since they were founded.
No, not that I know.
So
of.
they're
I'm
all
about
about stopping people from using the water that's already there. That's their approach, rather than making sure that from the enormous volumes of water that fall upon this land, even in a drought year you get quite a bit, you save that so that it can be used and spread out over the really bad years. They don't do the constructive approach the Victorians used to take. It's all regulation, bullying, and $35,000 fines for a person, $70,000 fines for a corporation, which they want to put up to $700,000 for a person, $2.2 million for a body corporate.
Section
if
69.
you make one tiny infraction of Section 69 of the Natural Resources Management Act 2004 in the state of South Australia. Tell me this. What happens how do they catch somebody taking water where he shouldn't? How do they go about it?
Look, they've got people hiding in sheds, they've got cars parked everywhere.
Give me an example of what they do.
Look, I've heard of a couple of cases where the NRM, the Natural Resource Management, and the Department of Water have hidden in a shed and watching people. I can give you an example where a person needed to fix the bank of their dam, and it took about 18 months working with the NRM and the council with no luck at all. And there was a guy that still lives next door. He's 95. He's a beef cattle producer, gets on his tractor, he's unbelievable. If this bank of the dam was not fixed, when it filled up in the winter time, it would have broke and his house would have been gone. He would have been, if it was at night, this poor chap would have been killed.
And they were not giving the necessary permits, as if a permit should be needed, to repair the dam, which was losing water, valuable water which they're supposed to be regulating.
Yes, and so we had to get the paper involved, and we had it fixed within a couple of weeks.
So the moment they knew people were watching their little games, they decided to play it differently.
And why this dam was being fixed, there was a vehicle up on the hill watching every movement. Can I just say one thing, Lord Monckton, and people need to know this. You know, we put up with fire, flood, mice plagues, locust plagues. We're not producing illicit drugs. We are producing a critical need. It's called food. We want to be left alone. We want to have the right to farm. We've got enough worry on our plate, believe me. And you know, we're looking over our shoulder 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we shouldn't be. This Natural Resource Management Board should be reduced to what we had years ago, to an animal and plant board.